Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for being here. Hi, at the penultimate lecture of the Baeck Institute London's annual series. This is my first talk since taking over as director, so I'm excited to be here. It is also the first event that we've had since the terrible events that have been unfolding since the weekend in Israel and Gaza, and aside from like everyone else being shocked and horrified at what's been happening, there's very little I can say in terms of comment other than that at the Institute our thoughts are very much with the victims and their families and friends, and we have a sister institute in Jerusalem. Everyone there is thankfully okay, but everyone, it seems, has been affected in some way or knows somebody who was affected. So yeah, it's very much I think a topic that needs to be addressed, but I think our intention is to carry on with our program. The lecture series, the Baeck lecture series, is a long-standing collaboration with the German Historical Institute London, and I'm delighted that Michael Scheich is here today as a representative of that institute. Michael, I don't know if you wanted to say anything.
Very briefly. Yes, good evening, everyone, and I also want to welcome you very warmly on behalf of the German Historical Institute London, and want to thank you for joining us tonight here in the room and online, especially at this time when the horrific attack by Hamas on Israel weighs heavily on all our minds. I think we are still in a state of shock, and I personally was in a kind of state of despair, to be honest. But I think it's important in this political context that it's more important than ever in a way that we discuss the topics that is at the heart of this lecture series, and that we think more deeply about how Jews and Jewish life were portrayed in the past. I'm usually rather skeptical about what history can teach us, but I think in this case, it seems vital. Knowledge of the past seems to be vital for our understanding of the present. That's why I'm really grateful to Professor Daniel Magilow for accepting our invitation to come to London and to speak to us. Joe will introduce him in a second, but I'm also grateful to the LBI for collaborating with us on this lecture series and on a number of lecture series in the past. Since the lectures have always been much needed spaces for intellectual engagement and debate. And without them, our work at the Institute would be also poorer. And this is also why I'm really delighted that our long-established partnership will continue under the new leadership of the LBI. And I want to welcome Dr. Joseph Cronin with his new role as director, also on behalf of the Institute. As it happens, Joe Cronin is no stranger to the Institute. A few years ago, he worked with us on a project on Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany in India, a very exciting project, which maybe could have gone further, but still it was a really good project. And so we are delighted to be able to resume this collaboration in a way on a much bigger scale. So, and all of us at the Institute wish you all the best for your directorship, and we are looking forward to welcome you back at the Institute every now and then when you are going to chair the Baeck lectures, which hopefully will return to the Institute, to our premises at Bloomsbury Square in next year. So thank you very much, everyone, and all the best to you, and congratulations to you. I hand back to you, then.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael, for the very kind words. Let me introduce tonight's speaker, who's traveled all the way from the United States to be here. Daniel H. Magilow is Professor of German in the Department of Modern Foreign Languages and Literatures at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where he's also an affiliated faculty member with the Fern and Manfred Steinfeld program in Jewish Studies, the Cinema Studies program in the Department of History. He earned his BA in Comparative Literature from Columbia University and his MA and PhD in German from Princeton University. He serves on the academic board of the Holocaust Educational Foundation of Northwestern University and was the Pearl Resnick Postdoctoral Fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in 2005-2006. With Helene Sinrei, Professor Magilow is co-editor-in-chief of the very prestigious journal Holocaust and Genocide Studies. His teaching and research, which have been supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Getty Foundation, the German Academic Exchange Service, and the University of Tennessee Humanities Center, center around photography and film, and their intersections with Holocaust studies, Weimar Germany, and post-war memory. Alongside many articles, book chapters, and reviews focusing on photography, film, and memorials, he is the author, co-author, editor, or translator of the following books. In Her Father's Eyes, A Childhood Extinguished by the Holocaust, which was published by Rutgers University Press in 2008. Nazi Exploitation, exclamation mark. The Nazi Image in Lowbrow Culture and Cinema, co-edited with Elizabeth Bridges and Kristen T. van der Lugt, published by Continuum in 2011. The Photography of Crisis, the Photo Essays of Weimar Germany, published by the Pennsylvania State University Press in 2012. Holocaust Representations in History, an introduction, co-authored with Lisa Silverman, first published by Bloomsbury in 2015 and with a revised edition appearing in 2019. And Yet It Will Be Heard, a Polish rabbi's witness of the Shoah and survival, written by Leon Thorne, but edited by Daniel Magilow and Emmanuel Thorne and published by Rutgers University Press in 2018. Finally, his edition of the collected works of the German photographer Albert Renger-Patsch, titled The Absolute Realist, Albert Renger-Patsch's Writings on Photography, Technology, and Modernity, 1923 to 1967, is forthcoming with Getty Publications. But tonight, we are excited to hear Professor Magilow speak about cute Jews, photography, and Jewish regeneration. Magilow,
thanks so much. Well, first and foremost, thank you all for coming out, and thank you also to everyone in Zoom land for attending virtually as well. We obviously do have a lot on our minds these days, and I agree that what we can do in these times is continue with our work to help people become more nuanced thinkers and able to navigate the uncertainties of the world, which I think is at the heart of a liberal arts education. I would like to formally thank the Leo Baeck Institute and the German Historical Institute for this, for bringing me over here. It is quite a trip, but it's a real honor to be able to do so. So thank you. I will at this point dive right in. In 1935, after the Nuremberg laws deprived Jewish Germans of their civil rights and ushered in a new phase of systematic anti-Semitic discrimination, Jews across Germany debated whether to remain in or depart from the only country that many of them had ever known. A large number had already answered this question through their actions. In 1933 and 1934, roughly 100,000 Jewish Germans left the country, and in 1935, another 35,000 emigrated, almost a third of them to Mandatory Palestine. It was within this turbulent context that a remarkable photographic document was published in 1936, Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel, ein Photobook, Jewish Children in Erez Israel, a photo. Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel was the last overtly Jewish-themed photo book published in Germany before the Holocaust. It was a collaboration between two German Zionists, the pioneering photojournalist Nachum Gidal, known as Tim Gidal, and the journalist and scholar Bertha Bad-Strauss. Even within Germany's rich interwar culture of narrative photography, which included ubiquitous illustrated magazines, deluxe coffee table photo books, and high modernist photo essays, Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel still stands out for its idiosyncratic subject matter and format. The photo book consists simply of Bad Strauss's 6-page introduction, a single page of captions, and, including its cover, 21 photographs by Tim Gidal of adorable, doll-like young children in Mandatory Palestine, many of them recent emigres from Germany. Each photograph in this slim, spiral-bound book is printed on one side of thick paper. The portraits accord with the journalistic conventions of so-called straight photography, with their sharp focus, candid feel, and natural lighting. But aside from their documentary character, they also seek to persuade readers through their sentimentality, as we see in these representative photographs. This first image is of a young girl with soft dark eyes, bobbed hair, and a gentle smile. Its caption reads, Ava's parents came to Jerusalem in 1935 from Germany. Ava already speaks Hebrew as well as German. And in this second image, which is captioned, Misha, formerly Merkel, came from Berlin to Tel Aviv. In it, we see a chubby-cheeked, smiling young boy whose baby teeth protrude from his beaming smile. These children left Germany with their parents for Mandatory Palestine, where they now appear to be happy, healthy, and thriving. Endearing photographs like these make it tempting to dismiss Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel as syrupy kitsch, or schmaltz, as one would say in Yiddish. And indeed, this photo book has attracted only minimal scholarly attention. One of the few photo historians to analyze the work at length, Patrick Rössler, reads Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel as visual evidence of what he terms an unholy alliance between Zionists and National Socialists at a historical juncture when their propaganda interests coincided. Rössler argues that by 1936, the Nazis wanted Jews to leave Germany, and Zionists were only too willing to oblige. As a text that promoted emigration, Rössler argues, Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel thus explicitly served the needs of Jewish Germans and implicitly benefited their persecutors. This argument that this photo book benefited both Zionists and German anti-Semites is certainly plausible. And it also applies to many of the handful of Palestine-themed photo books published in Germany dating back to at least the mid-1920s. One of these Palestine-themed photo books was Karl Gröber's Palästina, Arabien und Syrien, Baukunst, Landschaft und Volksleben, which appeared in an English edition as Picturesque Palestine, Arabia, and Syria, the country, the people, and the landscape. A second of these Palestine-themed books was Ludwig Preis and Paul Rohrbach's Palästina und das Ostjordanland. This richly illustrated book contained over 200 photographs, including 21 color images, which were quite a novelty at the time. A third Palestine-themed photo book from 1925 was Georg Landauer's Palästina, which was republished in a smaller edition in 1935. And to these three books, one can add a fourth, Arthur Rundt and Hans Kasparius's 1934 title, Das Palästina Bilderbuch, a set of 96 photographs with captions in German, English, Polish, and Hebrew. These Palestine-themed photo books all reinforced prominent Zionist themes to an audience in Germany, but they did so in new ways. Historian Rebecca Grossman convincingly reads photo books like these as attempts to understand and represent Zionism and the growing Jewish presence in Mandatory Palestine using the new visual language of photography. Photography had been flourishing in Germany since the mid-1920s, particularly with the introduction of handheld Leica single-lens reflex cameras and printing techniques that made photographically illustrated books and periodicals financially viable. Notably, these titles focus on sacred geographies, sublime landscapes, and historic structures. But none highlights children. as conspicuously as Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel. So we are left with the question why it uses this particular subject matter. We find one possible explanation for Gidal's aesthetic strategy in scholarship about the visual culture of Zionist youth movements. The historian Ulrika Pilarczyk has shown how photographs taken in the 1930s, 40s, and beyond of adolescent Chalutzim, the immigrants to Israeli agricultural settlements, helped establish a collective memory rooted in powerful Zionist ideals of Jewish community. Yet examples of this officially sanctioned Zionist visual culture, such as these images from the 1930s of young agricultural laborers, more often accord with the aesthetic conventions of a more muscular Judaism. We find a similar articulation of this masculinized Zionist aesthetic in film, as, for example, in Helmar Lersky's 1935 documentary Avodah work, which also promotes an image of Jewish settlers that replaces the cliches of the weak, overly intellectual ghetto Jew with images of powerful, determined, and active manual laborers. As historian Ofer Ashkenazi has compellingly written, Lersky's entire film, quote, reveals muscular Jewish male bodies in laborious motion, end quote. The obvious thematic differences between these officially sanctioned Zionist films and photographs and Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel are thus quite conspicuous. They invite several key questions about this photo book. How does its deployment of photographs of cute children who are decidedly not muscular and decidedly not at work accord with this project of envisioning Mandatory Palestine as the space of a Jewish future? Was it simply the case in 1936 that aesthetic strategies beyond depictions of muscular Jews were perceived as necessary to convince those Jews still in Germany to depart for the Middle East? In this talk, I argued that the answer to this question is yes. I read the 21 images of children in Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel as a form of soft propaganda that continues long-standing representational protocols of Holy Land photography and Jewish ethnography of the sort published by Preis, Röber, Landauer, Hund, and Kasparius in the photo books I showed previously. This emphasis comes through powerfully in the depictions in Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel of desert landscapes and iconic structures, as well as its subtle allusions to anti-Semitism in Europe. Yet Gidal and Bad Strauss's photo book also departs radically from these conventions when it synthesizes received aesthetic traditions with a new aesthetic oriented around cuteness to produce in its readers in Germany an affective connection to the Zionist project. By the 1930s, Holy Land photography had long been framed almost exclusively through the sorts of aesthetic categories that literary scholar Sion Nye terms prestigious aesthetic categories, many of which are derived from painting. These categories include familiar ones used to characterize aesthetic judgments, such as the beautiful, the sublime, the picturesque, and the spectacular. And indeed, in photography's first century, photographs of the Holy Land frequently appealed to these aesthetic categories. We find illustrations of this grandiose aesthetic in popular representations of the Near East, such as these views from the beginning of the 20th century by Underwood and Underwood, a popular distributor of stereoscope images. In these and in other examples of early Holy Land photography, we see clear horizon lines and wide-angle shots. The focus on large landscapes and iconic structures highlights the sense of grandeur and gravity, and the small size of the people in the photographs minimizes their importance within the context of the Holy Land's majesty. As we can see here, other visual strategies include the foregrounding of empty spaces and the de-emphasizing of the presence of indigenous populations as ways to subtly envision Mandatory Palestine as a tabula rasa for Zionist pioneers. In her 2012 book, Our Aesthetic Categories, Zany, Cute, Interesting, Sion Nye makes a convincing case for the political significance of minor or marginal aesthetic categories, especially those of her book's title, The Zany, the Interesting, and most relevant here, the Cute. Nye claims that these minor categories' very marginality is what makes them the, quote, best suited for grasping how aesthetic experience has been transformed by the hyper-commodified, information-saturated, and performance-driven conditions of late capitalism, end quote. She adds that, quote, the non-aesthetic properties associated with cuteness, smallness, compactness, formal simplicity, softness, or pliancy thus call up a range of minor negative affects, helplessness, pitifulness, and even despondency, end quote. As an example, Nye argues that the centrality of cuteness in post-World War II Japanese art and commodity culture owes much to this sense of helplessness, defeat, and catastrophe that was produced by Japan's loss in the war. The Japanese even have a term for this aesthetic, kawaii, meaning lovely, lovable, cute, or adorable, and it manifests itself across a range of mass cultural products like Hello Kitty, Pokemon, manga, anime, and so forth. I would argue that in the context of mid-1930s Germany, the doll-like feminized children of Jüdische Kinder and Erez Israel served an analogous function. That is, rather than frame the Holy Land in familiar aesthetic terms as the sublime space of biblical history and Jewish redemption, this photo book took a different tack. It represents Jewish German children and their plight in an explicitly sentimentalizing way. By emphasizing the cuteness of the children already in Mandatory Palestine, it implicitly infantilizes Jews in Germany by creating an allegory of their vulnerability in the face of anti-Semitic persecution. Moreover, the photo book's approach was particularly necessary by the mid-1930s because of the gendered effects of anti-Semitic persecution. In her research on daily life in National Socialist Germany, historian Marian Kaplan has shown the extent to which traditional gender roles persisted even in extreme circumstances. Jewish men and women alike were wary of the quote-unquote domestication of males, and activities such as cooking, cleaning, child rearing, and caring for the elderly or those too ill to emigrate remained the province of women. Thus, persuading German Jewish women to immigrate to Mandatory Palestine through strategies that interpolated them not as muscular laborers, but as mothers, caregivers, and the keys to a Jewish future is central to the narrative and visual rhetoric of Jüdische Kinder and Erez Israel. Furthermore, this photo book aims to establish positive, affective, and especially haptic relationships with the Holy Land. It encourages readers in Germany to embrace and love Zionism and a future Jewish state as they might dote on their own children, to figuratively pinch them on the cheek and praise them for having such a shayna punim. Here's my time. In so doing, Vidal in Bad Strauss's photo book broadens the lexicon of Zionist photographic strategies beyond sweaty bodies and socialist collectives tilling the fields and orchards. It posits a different Zionist aesthetic beyond the familiar visual tactics of a masculinized, muscular Judaism. Despite its idiosyncratic subject matter, the turn to cuteness that we find in Jüdische Kinder and Erez Israel is not entirely unprecedented. To the contrary, it continues a tradition of interwar German photo books about children and animals, many with an explicitly sentimental character. And I'll show you some in a bit. What sets Jüdische Kinder and Erez Israel apart as a photo book, however, is how it maps this sentimentality and cuteness onto older Jewish photographic traditions and visual codes. So, in the following, I will examine 3 photographic traditions and discourses to which Jüdische Kinder and Erez Israel is heavily indebted, in which it synthesizes into something entirely new. The first of these discourses is the early history of Holy Land photography. The second is early 20th century Jewish photographic ethnography. And the third context is the aforementioned interwar German photo book genre about children and animals. As I provide some of this media historical context and background for Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel, I will return to the photo book and examine several examples that show how it visualizes Zionist ideals of community, both by drawing on some aspects of these photographic traditions and by rejecting others. The first of these discourses, Holy Land photography, dates to photography's early decades in the mid-19th century. Then as now, one of the defining ideas underwriting photography's popularity was a belief that its unprecedented ability to render the natural world with a high degree of fidelity afforded it a unique status as a truth-telling technology. For this reason, the camera became an important tool for religious propaganda. For instance, one of the earliest photographers of the Holy Land, the Englishman Francis Frith, published albums and illustrated Bibles that aimed to verify biblical narratives scientifically. Frith's photographs, like the ones you see that were included in the album F. Frith's Photo Pictures of the Lands of the Bible, replicate the formal conventions of landscape painting and appeal to viewers' familiarity with the sublime, the picturesque, and other prestigious aesthetic categories that they would have recognized from landscape paintings. Other photographs, such as this deluxe photographically illustrated Bible in its image of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, help readers visualize sacred spaces. Writing about such depictions from the late 1850s, photo historian Douglas Nicol argues that Frith conceived and offered the stereo views, lantern slideshows, and folio editions of his photographs of Egypt and Palestine as spectacle. Frith was only one of many 19th and early 20th century photographers interested in making these kinds of images. Others, such as Felix Salzmann, Maxime Ducamp, Felix Bonfils, Francis Bedford, James MacDonald, Arthur Rhodes, and many others, also helped establish and popularize a set of photographic protocols for representing the Holy Land. Their images emphasize spaces of archaeological, historical, and religious significance and typically downplay individuals. Photographs of holy sites, ruins, desolate desert landscapes, and seemingly timeless but often invisible indigenous inhabitants aim to evoke responses of awe and reverence from viewers abroad. These early traditions of Holy Land photography persisted into the 1920s and 30s, by which time printing photographs in mass market books instead of just tipping in the images had become had made making photo books technologically and economically feasible. In interwar Germany, works like the Palestine-themed photo books that I mentioned earlier found a receptive readership. However, by this time, they had taken on new functions beyond simply helping believers visualize the Holy Land and experience it vicariously. Against the backdrop of racialized anti-Semitism and the emergence of political and cultural Zionism, these Palestine photo books also functioned as a form of propaganda. In review of several of these books that appeared in one of Berlin's leading newspapers, the Vossische Zeitung, in December of 1925, the reviewer Moritz Goldstein recognized how photography was helping make the Zionist dream comprehensible in ways that texts alone could not. Describing the photo books by Landauer and Price, Goldstein noted, quote, "You don't just want to hear about Palestine, you also want to see it," end quote. To use Goldstein's words, these photographs made Palestine greifbar, which means graspable both figuratively and literally. If Jews in Germany could not visit the Holy Land, then photography could help bridge the gap by creating an affective and tactile connection, like the bond between mother and child. And indeed, from its very first image, Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel visualizes this longing for a haptic relationship with the Holy Land. Like many images in this photo book, this one explicitly foregrounds the act of touching or hugging and the comfort and safety associated with it. This photograph depicts a young girl with a young woman who's possibly her mother or older sister. Its caption reads, quote, Yola's parents came to the country from Germany and Austria. They lived and died in Beit Alpha. That's where Yola was born and raised, end quote. The narrow cropping brings the young woman and girl closer together. Both smile and exude a sense of contentment, happy to have found a new home abroad. The photo book's second image functions similarly. We learn from its caption that, like the first photograph, it also depicts settlers on a kibbutz. The mother came to Emek Harod through the auspices of a Berlin Zionist organization, and she happily clutches her child, who already goes by the Hebrew name Narit. Although settlers like the ones depicted in these first two photographs faced many hardships, those challenges are invisible in these images. In the early 1920s, Polish and Russian Zionists established these settlements, Beit Alpha and Harod, that both attracted young people, especially European students. Yet neither the images nor their captions even hint at the fact that both settlements are located near Mount Gilboa, an inhospitable, malaria-infested terrain that even the Hebrew Bible describes as cursed. Instead, these photographs teem with connotations that Erez Israel is the space where Jews fleeing Europe are warmly embraced, in this case, literally. While the photobook traditions that aim to help Europeans visualize the Holy Land provide one crucial context for understanding how Gedal photographs space, a second important discourse, the practice of early 20th century Jewish ethnographic photography, helps us better understand how he represents the people. The most familiar examples of this type of photography are the products of expeditions to the ghettos and shtetls of Eastern Europe conducted by researchers and photographers such as Alter Katzizna, Shlomo Rappaport, better known as S. Ansky, Menachem Kipnis, and perhaps most famously Roman Vishniak. Sometimes funded by relief organizations, these projects became important ways to envision the unity of disparate Jewish populations and to mobilize Zionist sentiments amid rising anti-Semitism. Yet, unlike the popular traditions of Holy Land photography, this photographic mode frequently, although by no means exclusively, emphasized sentimentality and pathos, particularly in images of school children or youths. The reason is that some of these projects, most famously Roman Vishniak's, were funded by Jewish relief agencies for whom images of destitute Jews were useful fundraising tools. As Samuel Spinner has convincingly argued in his recent book, Jewish Primitivism, ethnographic projects like these by Jews, many of them living outside of Europe, often constructed Eastern European Jews as savage and primitive. Spinner cites Franz Kafka's image of Yiddish-speaking Jews with their superstitions, circle dances, and repetitive chanting as presenting, quote, an exciting repudiation of a hollowed-out, westernized Judaism, end quote, and a locating of the authentic. Spinner adds that this image of Jews from an anthropological past functioned as a, quote, critique of modernity activated by the positive evaluation of a purportedly pre-modern society, end quote. Photographs from these expeditions to the provincial backwaters of Jewish Eastern Europe gave visual form to this critique, which Spinner terms Jewish primitivism. One example of such a primitivizing ethnographic project was undertaken by Shlomo Rappaport, the author of the play The Dybbuk, who was better known by his pseudonym S. Ansky. S. Ansky and his colleagues traveled through Bohemia and Podolia between 1912 and 1914 to collect and record folklore, including oral histories, songs, customs, ceremonies, and superstitions. And notably, they also took over 2,000 photographs that show rich traditions of Ashkenazi Jewish community and culture, but also the oppressive material conditions of the Pale of Settlement. In these photographs, for instance, we see two images of children playing. Should I advance this here? No, I think I went too far. All right, two images of children playing. The one on the left is a slice of life scene of children during recess at the Cheder, the traditional religious elementary school. The photograph on the right depicts children clustered together next to a dilapidated building in Kremenets, which is now in Ukraine. Such ethnographic inventories by S. Ansky, as well as those by Katzizna and Vishniak and others, have become defining moments in the visual aesthetic of modern Jewry. In no small measure, these photographs' rhetorical power arises from their retroactive value in framing the fate of the Jews depicted. We, of course, know what they didn't, which makes their fate in these images all the more tragic. Books and exhibitions regularly package photographs like these with catastrophic, doom-filled, and backshadowed language. The title of a 1999 collection of Roman Vishniak's photographs of children typifies this approach. They are the Children of a Vanished World, the play on Vishniak's 1977 book, A Vanished World. Jeffrey Chandler has aptly characterized this photographic aesthetic with its sense of loss and impending doom as taking place in what he terms, quote, the time of Vishniak, end quote. The photographs resonate powerfully with received imaginings of authentic Jewish culture, but also the grinding poverty and pogroms of the shtetls. But insofar as Vishniak was photographing in 1935 on behalf of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, which had hired him to take pictures, that could be used for fundraising, Vishniak had a strong incentive to seek out photographic subjects that he could use to accentuate Eastern European Jews' traditional religiosity, poverty, pathos, and desperation. As a photo book about Jewish people in Jewish spaces, Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel echoes this practice of photographing Jews in indigenous spaces, even as it repurposes them for a new Jewish space in a new era. For instance, in the book's sixth photograph, we see a toddler in a space that is decidedly less oppressive than the shtetl. The landscape may be rocky, but the buildings are sturdy and modern with plentiful natural light. As we read in the caption, the settlement provides the young boy named Reuben, and implicitly other Jews as well, with enormous possibilities for discovery. But alongside the traditions of Holy Land photography and early 20th century Jewish ethnography, Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel also draws on a third, very different photographic discourse that was especially popular in interwar Germany, namely the genre of photo books about cute children and animals. As photo historian Roland Jäger has argued, juvenile-themed photo books that had diverse manifestations in Germany in the 1920s and 1930s. Representative works about children and animals included several titles by Heda Walter, who, like Tim Gidal, worked as a photojournalist for popular illustrated magazines. Walter's 1930 work, Mutter und Kind, Mother and Child, is one representative title, and she also collaborated on several books with the novelist Paul Eiper. With their many images of cute children and anthropomorphized young animals, these works reinforce ideologies of childhood innocence and purity. The genre of child and juvenile-themed photo books also included a wide range of politically themed works, including both folkish and explicitly fascist works, as well as leftist publications. On the political right, we find examples such as Unsere Deutsche Kinder, Our German Children, a 1932 photo book by Anna Lendwey-Dirksen, whose series of physiognomic photo books, Das Deutsche Volksgesicht, translated often as the face of the German race, fetishized Aryan types found in Germany and elsewhere in Northern Europe. Another example is the 1934 work Jugend Hitler, 120 Bilddokumente aus der Umgebung des Führers, Youth Around Hitler, 120 picture documents from the environment around the Führer. This book, like many other Hitler-themed photo books by the Nazi leader's personal photographer Heinrich Hoffmann, cultivated the mythology of Hitler as a caring, friendly, and avuncular leader who had a particular fondness for children and animals. On the other side of the political spectrum, we find works like Andreas Geig's 1929 photo book Die Rote Kinderrepublik, ein Buch von Arbeiterkindern für Arbeiterkinder, The Red Children's Republic, a book by and for children of the workers. Funded by the German Social Democratic Party, this child-themed photo book incorporated avant-garde photographic techniques such as photo montage in the service of a leftist pacifist message. And finally, alongside these explicitly political photo books, there also appeared in interwar Germany ostensibly apolitical works, although I'm skeptical of that, such as Lotte Herrlich's 1924 narrative of her son's development, Rolf, ein Lied vom Werden in 30 Naturaktaufnahmen. Rolf, a song of becoming in 30 natural nudes. Or her 1926 project, Geliebte Leutchen, beloved diminutive people. But whatever their political and cultural commitments, these child-themed photo books were all part of the interwar boom in the photo book trade, which made images of cute children objects for mass consumption in Germany by Jews and non-Jews alike. The photographic discourses of Holy Land photography, Jewish ethnography, and juvenile-themed photo books are the three key traditions, or at least three of the key traditions, there are probably more, that converge in Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel. Yet they do not coexist comfortably. In fact, Bertha Strauss's introduction states explicitly that the photo book rejects the traditions of sublime biblical landscapes and pathos eliciting ethnography, even if the work is very clearly informed by them. Her introduction teems with references to Theodor Herzl and his famous oxymoronic adjective alt-neu from his utopian novel Alt-Neuland, Old New Land of 1902, which imagined Mandatory Palestine as the space of a modern cosmopolitan Jewish society. And at the same time, Bad Strauss's introduction uses truisms and diminutive-filled anecdotes to encourage readers to see the photographs of cute children whose backgrounds might resemble their own as the hope for this old new Zionist future. Bad Strauss begins by narrating the origin story for the book, which supposedly arose out of Tim Gedal's encounter with the young Sephardic Jew who appears on the cover. Gedal was, according to the story, sitting in his Tel Aviv apartment wondering, quote, "How do I show the true Palestine to the people out there? This harsh and meager land with the bare mountains and fields scarce in greenery, this land that is unique in spite of everything," unquote. We then read in Bad Strauss's introduction that at that very moment, Masal, the daughter of the corner vegetable dealer, knocked on the door to ask if Gedal wanted to buy any oranges or chatzilim. Describing the little girl with her happy black eyes, prominent white teeth, and sun hat, as you see here on the cover, Bad Strauss continues, quote, "And when the photographer saw little Masal, you all can surely empathize with him. Then he knew. It wasn't the mountains or the fields, and not even the old walls and the deep seas that give this old new land its unique imprint. It's the children," end quote. She adds that if one can successfully represent the image of the children of Palestine, then one can create an image of the land that no travel guide can offer, because in Bad Strauss's words, quote, "Denn dies ist das Land der Kinder," for this is the land of children. But even as Jüdische Kinder and Erez Israel explicitly disavows photographic precedents and presents itself as a book that is looking for a new photographic idiom through which to represent a Jewish future, it nevertheless remains beholden to these photographic and aesthetic traditions. Many of the photographs still resonate loudly with the formal and thematic leitmotifs of Holy Land photography, Jewish ethnography, and Germany's culture of child-themed photobooks. The contest between photographic discourses of the sublime, the beautiful, and the objective on the one hand, and those of the cute, the sentimental, and the subjective on the other, manifests itself in a tension between the matter-of-fact captions to the photos and Bad Strauss's sentimentalizing, affect-eliciting descriptions of the same photographs in her introduction. For instance, photograph 11 is simply captioned, "Blick auf die Herzlstraße in Haifa," a view onto Herzl Street in Haifa. It evokes the romantic tradition of beholding sublime landscapes. Think Caspar David Friedrich's Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. But where Gedal's photograph puts readers in a subject position similar to the one occupied by the child viewing the cityscape and its Bauhaus architecture, Bad Strauss's introduction emphasizes the image's cuteness, not its modernity. She writes in her introduction, quote, "Here, one of the children peeks out over the balcony into the distant hills on the horizon. Perhaps she's looking out for a friend," quote. The caption suggests that the image primarily concerns a child searching for a playmate, like Jews looking for community and belonging that they could not find in Germany in 1936. Other examples of children in villages or kibbutzim evoke the ethnographic imagery of Ansky, Katzizna, and Vishniak. Like images by these ethnographers, Gedal's photograph in his purely descriptive caption on the village street of Bet Alpha shows Jews in situ in a small locality. Bad Strauss, however, transforms the children into reenactors of Bible stories when her introduction describes them as Adam und Eva, noch einmal erschaffen, Adam and Eve created anew. Similarly, where Gedal's caption Dan from Givat Brenner, his parents came from Italy. Gedal's caption characterizes the boy's family as immigrants, presumably Zionists and kibbutzniks. Bad Strauss instead stresses the boy's cuteness and writes, quote, "Whether the parents come from Italy, as in image number 12, or Russia, there's no difference. We always find in their beaming eyes the same passion for living and the boundless curiosity for all the new things unfolding around them," end quote. I'll conclude this talk by examining the final image of Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel, because the final units of narratives, whether written or photographic, tend to carry added interpretive significance. The final photograph's significance is conspicuous given the photograph's diminutive size. Like the image of the girl looking onto Herzl Street in Haifa, this photograph's caption, Am Strand von Tel Aviv, on the beach in Tel Aviv, is strictly denotative, even as it again evokes the affect-laden romantic trope of gazing into the distance. In her introduction, Bad Strauss latches on to this symbolism. She writes, and I'm translating here, quote, the tiny child's body before the infinity of the sea. This is one of the most gripping and thought-provoking images in this colorful series, end quote. This final image makes the project of Jüdische Kinder in Erez Israel explicit. One cannot see the child's face, and German Jewish readers across the ocean are her implied conversation partners. Only by emigrating to Mandatory Palestine can this child become visible. Only the completion of the Zionist project will make it possible to see and touch this cute Jew has already left Germany, for what she and her family hope are a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan, for a really rich and fascinating talk. Raises so many questions and not so many themes. I take it you're happy to take
Of course.
questions. Oh yeah, sorry. We've got people on Zoom as well, and I've been asked that if you would like to ask a question and you're joining online, please write your name in the chat, and then we can call on you to. I don't know why I'm talking to the in-person audience here. We can call on you to.
Welcome to my world, right?
So, but also take questions from the room as well.
Please. Sonia, yes, go ahead.
So thank you for this. Yeah, it's really fascinating talk. Really, that really interrogates a lot of the issues with this work that might seem really ephemeral. I was really thinking about the fact that it seems like a lot of the children in these images are refugees, and there were two things I was thinking about that might sort of raise the stakes of that a bit. And so I guess the first, and maybe make some sort of argument in that way as well, for the significance of their cuteness. One thing I was thinking about is that there's that cuteness serves some sort of evolutionary aspect, that when parents are dealing with a squealing, difficult child, the fact that they're cute means that they don't send that child off to the wolves or something like that. So the idea that maybe, I guess, speaking in the terms of this book, that maybe the fact that these children are cute is also, in a certain sense, a I guess a sense of sorry, this is probably the fact that it's in 1936, we have this knowledge of what comes, but in a certain sense, a justification of their presence or survival. Like, they're so cute, you don't want anything bad to happen to them. Aren't they great? And also just in general, the significance of children. I think of it generally in terms of the work that I've done in teaching literature about the Holocaust, where children are often really, I guess, really relatable or good characters to have in these sort of with children. People are sympathetic towards children, and it's a lot easier to have a sense of solidarity with them. So I was just thinking in terms of these children being refugees, and some sort of question about how they're received in Germany, whether the fact of their cuteness or the fact of their being children might in some ways be making an argument for readers in Germany about their own validity, their own significance.
Yeah, I mean, these are very, very important points. I think the way I understand the way this book is deploying cuteness is that by this time, a large number of the people who would want to leave and who were able to leave had done so. Obviously, not everybody. And as I mentioned, there was a very gendered dimension to this, right? A lot of more women remaining than sort of young pioneers, and so that this book is understanding itself or is acknowledging this kind of demographic imbalance that given when it came out. Like, I'm not sure this book could have come out and had the same resonance if it had come out just 2 or 3 years earlier, because it's very much targeting the remaining Jews in Germany who were disproportionately still women, who were there because many caregivers, like because of the gendered effects of anti-Semitic discrimination. So in that regard, it's sort of targeted marketing, like in sort of 1936 version of that rather than try to just sort of show another version of the same oiled, sweaty bodies tilling the soil. That is a different approach toward that, and particularly since Freud, the rhetoric of childhood innocence and purity, and that idea is very strong, in spite of Freud saying kids have lots of sexy thoughts and they're not as pure as we think. But that, I think that's the kind of mythology, the sort of chubby-cheeked cherub of Renaissance painting that is still very much in play here, and that this photo book is replicating. So I mean, you touched on a lot of things in your question. I hope this addresses some of them. Other questions?
Great talk. A couple of questions. First one I have for you is, what do you think happens to this culture, this German Jewish culture and the German culture making photobooks about Palestine? Because of course, on the one hand, it dies, literally, figuratively, of course. But I just wanted to zoom back and see, something that's quite obvious, I think, for you, but maybe not for everybody, is how German Jewish that culture was taken to war. Of course, there are great Jewish photographers who are not living in the German-speaking world, but it really is remarkable the extent to which the Palestinian photobook culture is a German Jewish one. And of course, there are photobooks later, but not by that same culture. But what are some of your thoughts about what's going on there? And then I also wanted to ask you what you make of the Jüdische Kinder book in terms of Guidal's later work, specifically his lengthy series of books called the My Village series, which is totally fascinating. And for people who don't know, I don't remember how many years he did this, and I'm not sure how many. There's at least a dozen books where Guidal travels the world, showing a village and village life and characters all around the world, kind of family of man in a photo book. So I will just, those are my
on the first question, I mean, my impression is, I agree with you. What happens to this German Jewish photo book culture? It sort of literally and figuratively dies, but to the extent it doesn't die, I think it becomes more of a Hebrew language photo book culture, which is to say one that is beyond the purview of this talk, or perhaps more honestly beyond the purview of my linguistic abilities. With the changes with the political changes, establishment of an actual state of Israel, I think that pretty obviously changes everything, because these kinds of books are not really necessary. I mean, for many reasons, these kinds of books aren't necessary. So, that would be my read on it. Like, what happens to these books? They kind of migrate into Hebrew. One analogy that I think of that's not really about photography, but is the bizarre situation at the Eichmann trial of all of these German Jewish lawyers talking to German Jewish judges in Hebrew, even though they could have, probably communicated more effectively and quicker in German. But again, part of this kind of translation or this, immersion of this culture into Hebrew. So that's my impression of what's happened with some of this photo book culture, to the extent I've looked at a few titles here and there, like Baeck did, some books, but those have gone from being in German and Yiddish into Hebrew. So, a translation and an adaptation. That, I guess that's what I say with that. The postwar series that Goodall and his, I think it wasn't just Tim Goodall, I think it was Sonia Goodall as well. Him and his spouse were doing. It was a kind of trade publication, photo book. Day in the life, day in the village. I think the archives for those are in some very bizarre place, like the University of Southern Mississippi or something. Like they're in some really strange kind of place. In case you're interested in doing more work on those, I've looked at a few of those. There's certainly a genealogical connection, right, between Goodall's, taking these kinds of photographs in this book, and then this kind of later project that's those are English language books, I believe. I don't know if they were translated, maybe they were, but they were certainly targeting an American readership, I think, first and foremost. And I think it speaks to the endurance of this, the appeal of cute kids, of cuteness, right, of seeing good-looking, adorable, huggable children, right? That sell. I mean, it's a marketing thing again. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a, if it didn't completely destroy the Zoom setup, I could pull up a cover of one of those books on my computer. But I think I will. I could show you later if you're interested. I think there's certainly a connection there. Please.
I wrote it down. My thoughts are category of cuteness is a political and social tool that amounts to itself as a natural evolutionary instinct.
Absolutely.
And it isn't. I think it's a constructed, it says very specific characteristics. I think it's wrong to say that it's evolutionary instinct in the same way that childhood is, and the significance of childhood is a 19th century construct. Childhood in itself is a construct. Childhood innocence existed. I think that childhood in the 18th century did not mean what it did in the context of the culture of domesticity in the 19th century. So both categories are a construct.
Yeah, I mean,
cuteness and childhood.
Yeah, this
very
is
new.
Absolutely. Well, this
evolutionary, but the mass is natural.
The argument in is it Philippe Ariès' Centuries of Childhood? I mean, this is his argument, and of course, the example. I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the example that's often brought up are these, these sort of early medieval depictions of, Mother Mary, and then the baby Jesus, who's just like a small person, doesn't have the kind of childlike features, and just in sometimes you'll see these sort of absurd early anatomical images of like little people, like rather than so childhood as a kind of just small, like shrunken version, rather than as something at a fundamentally different developmental state. And I mean, as a I suppose we could get into lengthy discussions of aesthetic politics and the constructedness of certain aesthetic categories, but I certainly agree. I mean, I would understand cuteness in the terms of Georg Lukács, who talked about second nature, which was his term for the way that capitalism finds ways of naturalizing things that are not natural, to the point that they mask their own constructiveness in such that indeed Georg Lukács, the Hungarian literary critic, I could give you the title after the talk. I mean, this is, I think, a kind of common refrain of certainly of Marxist criticism that aesthetics are used in deployment of certain political ends. And as part of that, they naturalize themselves to seem non-constructed, eternal, ahistorical, and so forth. So fundamentally, I agree with what you're saying.
We've got a few questions that have come up in the chat.
All right.
I think I'll read them like one and then you can answer them all. First is from Phil Weissenberg. Thank you so much for the talk. I'm struck by how similar many of the wartime / post-war images are to photos in the picture post and in the propaganda magazine for Kitchener refugee camp, some victims of the Nazi terror. Can you point me to books about a wider body of photographs taken at this time? I'd love to follow this up further.
Oh, that's a good question and a difficult one. If at this time means the interwar period, I mean there's an absolutely amazing book that has an utterly bizarre and inscrutable title called Autopsie, as in autopsy, a history of German photo books from 1914 to 1945. Who picked the main title? Not me. I don't know, but it's this 2-volume, lavishly illustrated set from Steidl, you know, the prestige German publisher that just does amazing books. That is, I mean, to me anyway, the kind of, you know, gold standard of German photo book histories, and it's, you know, I think I got it as a birthday present. It was like 60 pounds. It's ginormous. And it's based on the Manfred Heiting collection, which is, I believe, housed at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. So that's that would be the kind of alpha and omega of you know, where to go for more books about interwar German photo books. I hope that answers the question. Although all right, I see a thank you in the chat. I'll take that as having answered. Thank you, Claire, for your question.
Steve Weiss, thanks for this excellent talk. My question is about the word cute itself. In British English, it still feels a bit like a North American rival, perhaps alongside sweet. Does that have the same resonance? And what other terms in German might be used?
Interesting. Well, first of all, Sue, thank you for attending virtually. I mean, I can't comment on whether, you know, as myself a North American, I can't comment on the on whether cute has a kind of North American specificity to it. I do think in German they would say what, Zeus, probably, like sweet. Niedlich, yeah. I mean, and you know, in German, the way you say diminutive is a Verniedlichung, which is sort of like what, a slightly negatively coded smallness or something. You know, Katzig. So yeah, I mean, these are, I mean, that's a good question. I'd be curious what the etymology of cute is in this context. Probably something I should have looked up rather than taking it as a ahistorical category. So I don't know. I don't think I perceived, they may be there, but I certainly haven't perceived any differences between these categorizations that are so, I mean, there's obviously always a little bit of slippage culturally, you know, between cute and niedlich, or cute and sweet, or as we were talking about at a workshop, you know, Yiddish Teut and German Tod, right? Even those aren't the same, right? That these, you know, translation is its own thing, and there are these kinds of slippages, each having its kind of cultural specificity to it and its own traditions and genealogies. I do think I would, in the absence of doing additional research or having it on hand about, you know, the differences and etymologies of these words, I would suspect that while there may be some slippage between German and English, that it's still probably comparable. That's certainly one of the guiding assumptions of this presentation.
Alistair Greason asks, do you feel that the focus on depicting small numbers of children within the book was intended to send a subliminal message that there was a new land with space yearning for an increased population?
Interesting question. I mean, and I think, I think the phrasing of the question sort of suggests an answer in a sense. I mean, I do think it, I do think it by just having so few children there is the implication of, and we need more. But at the same time, I think one of the strategies of this kind of photography, which I might even in an anachronistic way refer to as neoliberal, would be to focus on individuals as a way of avoiding talking about structures and larger political issues by recasting the Zionist project as one of individuality and as one of individual decisions and individual commitments, rather than as something that, as we are tragically seeing, this past week, involves larger structures, larger groups of people, and that isn't simply a matter of what individual people do or don't want to do. So in that regard, I think the focus on individuals, the focus on singular children, the focus on small children is all part of it. It's part of its rhetoric. It's part of its persuasive technique that is, like so many appeals to children, somewhat emotionally manipulative. If we had 20 pictures of just, non-children, ugly children even, would that make them any less important, right? Would that make their lives any less valuable? I mean, I think the answer is no, but who's going to buy a book called, Ugly Jewish Kids in Palestine? Maybe Nazis, right? But
Well, could I try to ask you about the reception of the photobook? Do you know anything about the breakdown?
I don't know the numbers. I know it was understandably very small. The publisher was, let's see if I can. This is usually how you mess up your PowerPoint. As you see, it was the Brandutsche Verlagsbuchhandlung. So I mean, my impression is that this was just from a small bookstore, basically a small publisher. There were a few reviews in the Jewish press. They weren't particularly enlightening, rather than kind of articulating the sort of reception that one might expect of the kind of these, what a beautiful little photo book of all these cute children. There certainly wasn't. I mean, it's sort of taboo to critique these kinds of things, particularly with these handsome children. So there isn't much in the way of a kind of critical literature on it. Really the only critical scholarship on this that I know of is an article that appears in that big book on photobooks, Autopsy, by Patrick Rösler, a German art historian who talked about the book. But and he may have some details in there about the print run. They escape me at the moment, but not big, certainly. And in terms of its reception, not particularly interesting. Dare I use another minor aesthetic category in my description of it?
I just want to it's strategically going against the grain of much of the time.
Yeah.
Kind of muscular.
Yeah, exactly.
So it didn't prove to be controversial.
Sure. I mean, because it's yeah. I mean, it's a niche publication, both in the sense that it's in Germany, it's a Jewish photo book at a time when there aren't a lot of Jewish books, or increasingly fewer Jewish books being published. So it's niche in that way, and then it's niche in that it's not just Jewish, it's Zionist, and then in that regard, it's sort of further limited because it's not relying on the kind of received Zionist iconography of sweaty, oily working bodies. So a highly specialized publication for sure.